cool, so I can record all this stuff for you guys. Okay, hold on. All right, welcome back. We are Game 2014. That's Mobile Game Dev 1 in the fall 2021 semester at George Brown, and it's week 6, part 2 of our broadcast. And what we're doing today is, again, this time was we're just kind of making the factory in Unity, just continuing with what our last video we made. I'm just going to copy the video link and put it up here on Blackboard, just to make sure that that people that need it can always go up on Blackboard and watch the live feed, as opposed to watching me on Zoom. Or if you're here and you're watching this at a later time, you can always refer to this back here for studying purposes, or for even for your lab 4 that we're doing today. Okay, so let's get back into this. So now, yes, we have some really great suggestions from Maxim saying, hey, maybe not an enum, but maybe we use a vector instead, velocity or whatever, and we can have the direction as opposed to just the speed. We can make a speed and direction vector. That's also very good. There's nothing wrong with doing that. I'm just offering up different options here for sure. So, all right, so that we know we have different bullets and whatever. Let's start making our factory. So I want to call this bullet factory. So again, the thing for us to think about is how we want this thing to function. Okay, so and we want to keep it as straightforward as possible. All right, so let's again, let's do the same thing. So I will go and right click and make a new C# script. Hopefully you did what I did. Let's see if you did. We'll call this bullet factory, right? And the bullet factory script, let's think about a couple things. One thing is we want to have different bullet types, right? I want to have a regular bullet, like an enemy bullet. I want to have a player bullet. I might have a bullet that goes to the right, diagonal bullet, different kinds of bullets, right? That we want to be able to support. So, and there's a couple things we can do here. We could make this an abstract class. So if you said public abstract class, that's the keyword you can use. An abstract class that also inherits from mono behavior. You can totally do this. You can do like an abstract superclass, no problem. Okay, and then you can make your subclasses from there. But for us, for our little example for today, let's not make it abstract. Let's just make it work, and we can always go back and add complexity afterwards. All right. So one thing is, in our class, do we need a start method? And do we need an update method? And does it have to be mono behavior? Well, because we're going to attach it to our game controller, for now, we're going to say, let's leave it as mono behavior. Later, we're going to make it a singleton, and we can remove this. But for now, let's get rid of all this. Next, in order for our class to be what it's going to be, it needs to have access to the prefabs. Okay, so for now, let's think about different prefabs. So let's say we'll make a header, and we'll call this header bullet types. Okay, for now. Other ways to do this, and I want you guys to think ahead and maybe think better than me, faster than me, and think about where you would take this next. Let's just make 2 bullets. Our enemy bullet, and we'll also make a player bullet. Okay? Are there other ways to do this? Absolutely. I encourage you to do it differently. All right? But first things first, let's make it so that we can make it go. Remember, my motto is make it work, and then refactor. Okay, so enemy bullet, player bullet. Those are the two types. It has to be, these are properties that are inside of my bullet factory. Okay, and now I need a public game object. I'm going to return the game object that I want, which is going to be called create bullet. And I want the type of bullet to create. Okay, the type of bullet to create. So again, there's a couple ways to do this. I could pass strings, I could pass numbers, I could pass whatever, but I'd want to pass an enumeration. So let's go back and make another enum. I know, hear me out. I'm making extra code, and you're going to like, why is he making extra code? Just follow along for now. And then I hope you can figure out better ways than I'm doing it. So we're going to call this bullet type. And bullet type, just like we have before with bullet direction, we're going to make this an enum too. Why not? Make it an enum, get rid of all this stuff, right? And we're going to do all this, get rid of this. We don't need Unity Engine. And we can call this an enum, all the same things we did before. And this time it's going to become the bullet type. So there's going to be two right now. We're going to have enemy and we're going to have player. Okay, again, you can add to this list, right? We can add enemy, player, you can have different kinds of enemy. Instead of just an enemy or a player, we can have a seeking bullet. We can have a bullet class, if you will, a class of different kinds of bullet, seeking bullet or whatever it's going to be, or an area of effect. For now, there's only two, and we want to use one or the other to do this. Good. Just reloading my scripts for a second. And good. Now that we have my bullet type, then inside my bullet factory, I can say that, let's bring this back into being. I can say that the create bullet function that we're going to have, which is going to be public, is going to instantiate a new bullet type. So we're going to say bullet type, which we're going to say type, is equal to, by default, if I'm not told anything different, let's say that it's only the enemy that it creates by default, the enemy bullet type. And it returns a game object. Let's also make this class system serializable. So it's not strictly adhering to our pattern, but it doesn't matter. It's just, we're starting off with the idea of a bullet creation object, okay? And what I want to do is, I want to do a couple things. I want to say that game object, we'll call this temp bullet. Just like before, here's my temp bullet. And I'm also going to give it some kind of structure. We're going to say that it's null to start off. So we're going to initialize it as null. Hear me out. Then what I'm going to say is, let's do a switch case again. We'll switch on type. Isn't that wonderful? So depending on the type, if my case is a bullet type enemy, then I'm going to do something. If my case is a bullet type player, then I'm going to do something else. Okay, so we're going to, again, decouple the stuff that we're doing, right? And what I want is my temp bullet, right? I'm going to say that that is going to be instantiate a type of bullet of, my enemy bullet. And I want you to think about how I can do this differently, please, because this will be something that you should think about. How do you improve the code, right? Think about this for a second. So this should be player bullet, right? Doesn't matter. They're both returning a game object, and they're both bullets. We can come back to this in a second. Now, the other thing we want to think about is I want to have the temp bullet itself. Okay. I want to, these are just bullets that I have, right? And what else do I do here? So now that I've instantiated the bullet type, what I want to say is that temp bullet, let's say that it's going to go into the parent of this thing, which is going to be the game controller anyway. So transform.parent, or you can also say set parent is equal to transform, and as well as the temp bullet dot set active by default is false. This just creates bullets. It doesn't cast bullets out into the real world, right? This is just a bullet creator. And return temp bullet. Okay, question for you guys. Is this enough, right? So Maxim asks, is it fine to create an enum not in a separate file, but inside the CS file it's related to? And the answer is yes, you could, but that means, remember, single responsibility principle from a testing perspective. A lot of times what we want to try and do is create a separation, not because it's wrong. I mean, obviously, if an enum is only being used for this bullet type, for this bullet factory, that's okay. But what if I want to use the bullet type somewhere else? As an example, where I want to refer to a type of bullet as a certain type. I don't know, right? So that's why I start off the other way, Maxim. I start off as, before I'm refactoring, I make it a separate file. And then what I do afterwards is if I need to wrap it in, because I want to clean up my files, I'm only going to use it here in this class. I may do what you say, but I may not. Right? This way I have an option of using it outside of my my bullet factory class or not. Okay? The other way, you don't have an option. It's only inside of your bullet factory class. unless you system serialize that as well. Okay, but again, doesn't really matter. I think is the answer. Structure-wise, I do it this way because I follow the single responsibility principle. Okay, so now this is kind of a bullet factory. This is good. I need to connect my bullet factory script to my game controller somewhere for now because it inherits their mono behavior. All right. So again, if I go back to my game controller now has a bullet manager as well as I'm going to add in a bullet factory. So let's take the bullet factory, put it on. And the bullet factory now, instead of the bullet manager having a knowledge of the prefab, the bullet manager won't. It's going to access the bullet factory's information. Hear me out how this is going to work. So now let's go to the prefabs. And by the way, instead of bullet types, I can have a series of bullets or a bullet list of types that I can have here as well. There's lots of ways of doing this, but I want to give you guys some ideas. So let's go enemy bullet here. And let's say the player bullet is here for now. So just two types of bullets, enemy bullet, player bullet. Awesome. Okay, cool. Let's also put this script higher up as an example, because I think bullet factory should be before bullet manager. Bullet manager should access bullet factory. And so just from a hierarchy perspective, I like to see it this way. Not required, but doesn't matter. All right, next. Now that I have my bullet factory in place, I need to make it work. So how does this work? Let's take let's just replace the bullet manager, the way it creates bullets. Let's create them inside the bullet factory. So now let's go back to my bullet manager script and let's see if I can use the bullet factory instead of my own creation process, which is right here. Add bullet is where the bullets are created in the first place, okay? And there's only one pool of bullets. So I don't need my bullet prefab anymore. Let's get rid of the bullet prefab. Bye-bye, bullet prefab. Because I won't need that because that bullet prefab is inside of the bullet factory. That's where it's going to be. Okay? I do need the bullet pool. The bullet manager, all it cares about is managing objects in the pool and getting objects into the pool, but it doesn't create objects. That creation is something that belongs to another structure, all right, which is the factory itself. All right? So now you can see that I've just removed that. So the bullet prefab and the set active and the transform and all that stuff is something that I want to get from somewhere else. So the add bullet function is where I'm going to use the bullet factory itself. Okay, remember that the bullet factory has been created, instantiated by the game controller, right? So I need to do the same thing that I did last time, which is I want to get a reference to the bullet factory somehow, okay? And let's just do it so that it is private. We don't need to share that information. So we'll say something like, hey, I want to make a private reference to the bullet factory. Okay, here's my private reference. We'll call this factory. Okay. And then inside here, what I want to say is factory. Well, that's equal to a get component bullet factory. Okay. So that we know it's inside of the bullet factory. So gets a reference to the bullet factory. Okay. So factory is the reference. That's why I make a reference, because bullet factory has been instantiated in this paradigm still. We're still working with objects. We're not working with singletons yet. Okay. So factory. Yay. Awesome. Well, that means that down in here, what I want to say is on cue a bullet, where we can say, let's just make a var temp bullet here in this reference, in this frame, where we'll say that, hey, factory, I want to create a bullet as an example that for now is of type enemy. Because I don't have to specify the type because by default, it is the enemy type for my bullet manager when I use add bullet. Okay, so all I'm going to do is replace what I had with what I have now. Okay, and then we'll add the player firing capability. All right, let's think about this. Okay, so is this enough? So does add bullet? Well, the creation doesn't happen here. The creation happens here in this structure right here. This is where I create a bullet. It creates whatever bullet I want. It doesn't know. I don't know at the end what type of game objects I'm returning, but I'm returning a game object reference. I don't know which one. It could be the enemy or it could be the player, right? And because both types of bullets are already pre-configured with the direction and all that kind of stuff, it's still pretty cool. I'm just abstracting, all right? And this is kind of like a first level of abstraction if you think about what I'm doing here, all right? All right, so this is good. And if everything works, then I should just be able to run my code, and my enemy should be able to fire bullets just like before, but instead of managing from the from here, the creation code is not here, it's inside the bullet factory itself. Let's try it. Right, cool. We got our enemy script. Notice that there's no more prefab inside the bullet manager, and let's run it. And if everything went well, then it's good. If it didn't go well, we're gonna have an error. Hey, look at that. And it says specifically enemy bullet. That's what it says now, enemy bullet type. Okay, good, nice, nice, nice. Right, still firing, everything's the same. We can see that there's 12 bullets that have been accumulated inside the bullet pool, and the enemy factory will spit out whatever bullet we want. Okay, separate scripts. Awesome, so very simple so far. Let's put this up on GitHub. So again, file, save project, and let's get out of here. And I want to put this up on GitHub. But one thing to note is that my project settings, which is for this one, in my README file, that's wrong. Let's change my README file. So I'm just going to double click here and just launch some editor like Visual Studio Code, just to change the README file so it says, when it feels like it, for A. Nice. And now that we have this, we can go back here inside of our Git Kraken and go to View Changes. We can see all these things that have changed. Stage all changes, and we'll say Added Bullet Factory. This is like kind of a first version of our bullet factory, if you will. It's not quite exactly what we're looking for. All right. And let's push this up. So now you have what I have, right? It's online, and you see it on Week 4's GitHub repository. We're not there yet, though. And we're not there yet because our project still does not support bullet firing by the player. We have a bullet factory we've replaced. Remember this overhead. We've kind of done the overhead already, right? And the overhead is we've kind of like retrofitted our code to allow for a factory, a separate class altogether that deals with the bullet creation. Bullet creation code is now in here and not in here. Separate things, single responsibility principle. This one has a bullet, some kind of bullet pool, manages the pool. This one here creates the bullets. Okay, and we only have two different types of bullets that we kind of log. We kind of configure the class. It has access to the types of prefabs we want. We can have a long list of prefabs, and it'll generate whatever we want. Yay, awesome. But how do I fire the bullet? Well, we know that we need some kind of player code to fire the bullet, to instantiate the bullet off. We know also when the bullet gets returned, it should go into the right pool. So that's something that is new, right? How does it know which pool to go back into if we have multiple pools? And how do we pull a bullet from the bullet pool, right? Depending on the type of bullet it is. So there's a couple of approaches here, right? Let's take a look at the bullet manager for a second. So here's our bullet manager. Right now, our bullet manager only has a single bullet pool. So option 1, make another one. We can make one bullet pool per bullet type if you really want to, right? Bullet pool A, bullet pool B. What other things can we do? Anybody? What other things can we do? What other options do we have? Do we have to make more than one bullet pool? Is it required? Well, in the way that we're doing it here, could have different functions. We could do that. But I want to pull it up here for a second and think about this, right? I could make a separate pool. So let's rejig this pool. Let's just rename this thing. So refactor, rename. And our bullet pool, we could just call this the enemy bullet pool. Enemy bullet pool. Okay, so we could do that. We can make a second bullet. Absolutely, we can make a second bullet manager. That's also an option, right? Let's do a couple things. Let's do one bullet manager that manages them all. right? So we'll say that this bullet manager also manages player bullets. Okay, so enemy bullet pool, player bullet pool. Awesome. The bullet number also needs to be modified because our bullet number is only going to be specific to the type of pool. If we want to make it dynamic, let's do that again. So again, refactor, rename, but you're going to see some duplication here, guys, right? And once we have duplication in your mind, there should be another option, another solution. So enemy bullet number, and hey, well, we need player bullet number too, right? So that's important. So let's do that, public ints, and we'll say player bullet number, right, where we can keep track of it. We don't really have to have these. These are just like for us to be able to see the size of the bullet pool. We can also just use another something else for here altogether, but let's suppose. All right, I'm just kind of playing along here. And when I add a bullet, first of all, the bullet pool, build bullet pool, no longer required. We don't need this function because that was a remnant of what we did last week. We don't need that anymore. Add bullet, Yeah, you know, this is where, depending on the type of bullet, going back to Maxim's idea, depending on the type of bullet that I want to add a bullet to a different pool. Let's start with that idea, right? So let's suppose that the bullet, add bullet, to make it backwards compatible, takes a bullet type. Maxim, remember going back to that whole enumeration thing, right? It's going to have a bullet type that I want to create, which is type, which will set to bullet enemy as default. So that is, it's backwards compatible with what we already have, right? Okay, so this is something that I'm just going to make the thing. I'm enemy bullet pool on queue. Yeah. Very nice, very nice. When I add a bullet, very nice, very nice. And also, something else is happening. See, here I have enemy bullet number plus plus. Maybe we do the add enemy bullet number here in here instead of down in here. So let's bring this code up. No one mentioned this before, but what the heck? Let's just do it. So we'll say that this is something that looks like this, right? So I add a bullet depending on the bullet type that I want. You know, as an example, my bullet type. So this is definitely somewhere I can put it. Add bullet. Well, I'm saying, hey, factory, create the bullet that I want based on the type. Based on the type, right? Whatever the type is, then I can add that to the thing. So I can say I can pass in type in here, right? Because create bullet by option allows me to pull in a bullet type. By default, it's the enemy, and it will be if I don't say anything. But what if I do? Then I want a different pool to be updated. So let's say we'll do a switch case, lots of duplication on type, and case if it's a enemy bullet, or case where it's a player bullet. You can see where I'm going, but is this the right thing to do? And we can grab this and pull it here, and we can grab this and copy paste, guys. Copy paste is bad, right? And we can say player bullet number. Sure, this is all stuff that'll make our code work, right? Code's working after this, right? And so, yeah, we'll add it to the right pool, and we'll increase the bullet number that we need. And here we can check if the type of bullet thing that we want, right? Right now, we can say is if we get a bullet and we need the type of bullet that we want, right? More duplication, right? Where I can say that depending on which one I want to, kind of get, then I can specify the type. So, hey, there's the bullet type again, right? Bullet type. I'm just going to keep writing, right? Because I like adding code. I'm being facetious, of course. And we're going to say that by default, the bullet enemy is here. And hey, I love this case switch case stuff. Let's add some more switch cases. So switch case to the type, right? And we're going to say that the first type is case bullet enemy, break, and case the other one, player. I'm really getting bored already. And let's see if, wow, I'm getting so bored I'm making mistakes. And wow, this is like so much I can do here. Let's just rejig this whole thing and let's just put it here. And oops, I'm being overzealous here. Let's try that again. I meant all of this, cut that out and put that here. And what about if not, then go here. We could do this, but that doesn't make sense. And so maybe I'd want to have a temp bullet up here. Temp bullet will be a game object type. Just like we did before. And then we just say that this is this. And there's some duplication. So we want to, bear with me while I go through this. Return should be down here because we're going to have an issue. If we just do it here, I'll say there's no definite return type, because what if it's not one of these two? And we can say that the player, you know where I'm going with this, guys. Come on. Add a bullet, but we want to add what kind of bullet? Well, we want to add in the type of bullet type of player. And well, this is just a regular one, so it's bullet type enemy. And we can say that the player bullet pool DQ, right? And if we can go further and do all that kind of stuff. I think this almost does it. Let's see, bullet pool player, bullet pool, different kinds. Whew. Right? Can I do this? I mean, yes, I could. Get bullet is now much fatter, but it basically says, hey, depending on the type that I pass in, by default, it's going to be the enemy type. Then I should be able to do this. Again, what I recommend is retrofit. Does it still work with the code that we have? First case, before we do anything else. I know, Maxim and Spaghetti, absolutely. Why? Because we're duplicating. And we're going to do it again down here, right? Right? Well, let's see if it works. So going back to this, does it still work? Did it break anything? You know, what's happening here? Because that's important, right? Does it still work? The original case. That's what I would do. Does the original case still work? If the original case doesn't work with what we've done, bad things happen to good people. You know, don't add anything else until you know the original case works. Okay, next. Okay, so now that we have this, the add bullet, well, what about when we get a bullet? Sure, we got this. And what about when we return a bullet? Well, we can put a thing in here that says the type of bullet to return, which by default is the enemy bullet, right? We can say that bullet type right? We can say that that's the bullet we'll return. So instead of return bullet set active to false, whatever the return bullet is, we don't care. That's true. But now, depending on what it is, got switch case. We can also use if statements. But what if you had more? That's the idea here, right? What if I had more? Then it's on type. Again, case is bullet type enemy. And case is bullet type player. You can see that I can do this all over the place, and I can do this for days. It's not going to make my code any nicer looking, right? But the idea here is that now I have a mechanism for returning player bullets back to the player pool, and I have a mechanism for returning bullets or getting bullets from the player pool specifically for the player. All right, so that now gives me, I don't care which bullet I'm returning. It really depends on who's like, how am I going to say, how am I going to trigger, because the bullet itself triggers what type it is. Oh man. So that's another thing now. Not only does the bullet need to know about the direction, it should know about its own type. Oh, this is terrible. Let's go back to bullet. So bullet behavior. Well, we know the direction. So now we should have something else up here. That is the bullet type. Public bullet type. Man, oh, this is killing me already with all this extra code, right? And let me just see what happens here. When I do this, you guys are letting me. This is good. No one's stopping me. I like it. Okay, it's making my life easier, that's for sure. But doesn't mean it's better. Let's go back to the enemy bullet now. and I should specify the type as enemy. And by the player bullet, we should specify that the type is player, right? Because that type is important. That's the way we're going to know which type to send back. And let's fix that in bullet behavior. Let's go back, scripts, bullet behavior. And you can see where I'm going with this. When I leave my bounds, I'm going to return my bullet if it's going up. That means if I'm going down, right? It really depends on the bullet type. But just to be explicit, let's put it in here. We'll say something like the type. Whatever the type is, we'll send back. And the same thing goes with here. Depending on the type, maybe the bullet's somehow going to bounce, whatever. But depending on the type, it's going to be returned back to its own pool. Okay, so that's in the check bounds function of bullet behavior. Whew, right? So it gets returned, it gets called. Again, let's check to see if this case satisfies what we already have. So going back, let's run the game without using the player behavior yet, because we need to always check to see that everything is good. Let's try this out. So play, and are we good? Right? And things look like it's working okay because it's going back into its own pool. It's doing everything, and we know it works for the enemy. Okay, the test. Here's the test. Let's modify our player behavior now. And this is where, after this point, you can start reorganizing your code and refactoring. We have a bullet factory. We have 2 bullet pools. Is there a better way to do it? That's the question I have for you guys. Is there a better way to do it? What would you do differently? Would you make a separate bullet manager? That is something you can do. That is an option. You can make a separate bullet manager. But again, you're duplicating code there too, in some ways, right? So you actually, it's almost like the one bullet manager exactly like the other one. Ah, Maxim says, I would do a bullet manager base class. That I agree with. And this is where you start thinking about inheritance. What is like for like? What can I do differently? Okay, player behavior. So player behavior check bounds and move. Well, guess what? We're going to check fire. All right, so we're going to have a new method called check fire. You can also call this fire, whatever. And we'll make it a private method. Oh, here it is. And I want something that looks like this, but I want var y, right? And actually what we want is input.getAxis is if input.getAxis raw, let's say, and we'll use the jump thing for the, the space bar, okay? If x-axis raw jump, right, is greater than 0, which means I press the button, right? If it's anything greater than 0, then I'm triggering my fire button for the first time. I'm doing it inside of my my fixed update, which means I can't spam, right? It won't allow me to spam. It'll click it every single time. And when I check fire, if I hold the fire button down, I'll keep on launching bullets. Well, here is where I want to fire a bullet. How did I do it in my enemy behavior? So in my enemy behavior, let's go back to that. Here it is. Here's my enemy behavior. And what I do is I get a bullet from the bullet pool from the bullet manager, which means I need a reference to the bullet manager itself. And I need to do that by having this duplicate code. Notice I mentioned duplicate code because it is duplicate. So copy this bullet manager, go back to my player behavior and go back up to the top. And let's put in this. Oops. How about we do it the right place instead of the wrong place? And let's just do this, same copy paste. Yeah. Whoa, we're cooking now. We think we're good, right? We got the bullet manager over here, and now down in here we can say, hey, bullet manager, guess what I want to do? I want to fire a bullet. That's what I want to do, right? I want to get a bullet, right? Because that's what it does. And I want to get the type of bullet that I want, which is in this case, it's got to go to the spawn position, but we don't have a spawn point, so we need that too. That's something that we can drag and drop. So we can say something like down in here, another header, just so we don't disrupt anything, called player bullets. or player attack, right? And we'll call this a public. Remember, it's probably going to be a transform called a bullet spawn. Okay. And that's kind of something that we did inside of the enemy behavior, right? In the enemy behavior, we also called it the bullet spawn, right? So that's what we need because we're modeling the player behavior from the enemy behavior so we can make it work. So bullet manager needs a position. We're going to send in the bullet spawn as well as the type, which is going to be a player bullet, which is going to fire up. So every time I press the check fire button, press the jump button, it's going to fire unlimited bullets, right? And that should do it, right? Jump is just a space bar. That's what it means. You can also get access, get key, input.getKey space. You can do that. You can also do input.getAccess raw vertical and look at anything up. So you can use like the up button or the W button, whatever you want. However you want to do this, it's up to you. It's just, that's academic. All right. So that's good. So we have a check fire. One thing we have to do is modify the player a little bit. We're almost done, guys. Modify the player. And under the player behavior itself, you can see that the player spawn has a bullet spawn position. We have that here. There's the bullet spawn. So we need to put that in there. Okay. If we don't put that in there, we won't have a reference to where it's going. Our bounds are the same. And now let's see if this is going to work. Is it enough is the question. So let's run it. And we should be able to, at this point, move, right, and fire. But we have a problem. It says bullet manager, get bullet, right? Player bullet. It says bullet manager, get bullet. We did that. And it says that null reference object, reference not set to an instance of an object, bullet manager, get bullet, didn't work. How come? Let's trace it. So here's get bullet, go to definition, right? And it goes to here. Here's my game object, get bullet, right? And it says I want a type of bullet, whatever the type is. I come to my switch case and I say that the type I want is a player. My temp bullet is coming from the bullet pool DQ, and it says that if my player bullet count is less than 1, then add another bullet to the bullet pool. All right, so this is where it becomes, like Maxim said earlier, a little bit of spaghetti code. Spawn position, we came into spawn position, so this is where it's going to go. So what the hell does this mean? It doesn't make sense, right? Null reference exception, object reference not set to an instance of an object. What else does this say? And so we can expand some of this to see where it's going. It says get bullet, spawn position bullet at assets, right? And null reference exception, object reference. So what reference is null reference? What is null? How do I fix this problem? Because we're going to get this problem, guys, here and there, right? Well, let's go through and make sure that everything has a reference. So game controller, all references are there. Back button, we don't care because the game controller set up for screen and safe area for now we're ignoring, right? What about our prefabs, right? So prefabs for the enemy, looks like it's okay. The enemy bullet, enemy and down, that looks okay. The next button, we don't care about. Player, the bullet spawn. Oh man, well that's a problem, but that we can fix here by going to overrides and apply all. That's fixed. This is not really the problem, but we can put that in, sure. And the player bullet, player type and up direction. So what are they talking about when they're saying this thing, right? Well, the player bullet itself, the player object, is also trying to make a reference to the bullet manager, right? So player behavior, right? Remember player behavior? It said that, hey, I want to get a private reference to the bullet manager, and the bullet manager is game object, find object with type bullet manager. That's where I'm getting this thing, and that's what's happening, all right? Could that be the issue? That we don't have a reference to the bullet manager before I call the bullet into play, because checkfire is actually going to be running every frame, right? And I'm saying, hey, if my jump is greater than 0, then hey, bullet manager, get a bullet, right? Is that where it could be? So let's save all, make sure all my scripts are saved. And let's try this again. Maybe I didn't save a script, and run. Could be that reason. So they're firing at me. I can move around. And if I press spacebar, oh man, I got another issue. So what could be the issue? Well, how do we trace it? How do we do our stuff before we go? Because we're running out of time. How do I trace the problem? What do I do? Well, I know that this is where it's coming from. Get bullet. So let's see what happens. Let's trace it by step. So bullet manager, get bullet goes here. Do I come into play in my bullet manager itself, which is here? Here's spaghetti code, right? I get a bullet, and my temp bullet is null. It works like this. This part works. Enemy bullet count, player bullet count. It adds a bullet, player bullet, not enemy bullet, right? No problem. Player bullet pool, DQ. Once I've added a bullet, it DQs from the bullet, returns the bullet back out. Here's my temp bullet that I want to return. Case its bullet type is player, right? Those are the two types. So what if it's something else? Do I even get to this point? So let's do a debug log. Again, we'll start off small, which is I'll say adding, or we'll say getting, not adding it, player bullet. Let's see if it got to this point. Do we get here? When I call the bullet type, does it ever get here? Okay, let's see what happens. So go back, and we'll go do it. What else? What else could it be? Yeah, I know it's not working for me. So it could be something I'm missing. So let's figure out. Maybe I did something wrong in my insanity. So all right, look at that. So it says getting player bullet. So it came to here. Okay, it came to here. So I'm just tracing it. So it came to this point. We know this is okay. And we check to see if the bullet pool, my player bullet pool count is less than 1, right? Because here we instantiated the player. I know what it is. I know what it is. I know what it is. I didn't do this. There's no bullet pool. The bullet pool was never created. Let's make one. Woohoo! I love it. Okay, let's see if it's this problem, right? So we have to say something like, we have to say something like this, right? Where I say, hey, player bullet pool, let's make a new one. Now you'd think that Unity would do it for us up here, right? But it didn't. By the way, these public stuff doesn't have to be public because it doesn't show up anyway, because queues don't show up. So this is create an empty init player bullet pool, bullet queue, and this is an empty enemy bullet queue. Maybe I missed this piece. All right. So I have to manage differently. Let's try it again. Let's see if this is the issue. Is it a memory allocation thing? Yes. And now I can do this. I can cast bullets as much as I want, and I can have as many bullets. I can spray bullets, man, like crazy here, right? All over the place. But, oh man, wait a minute. I have a ton of player bullets and enemy bullets, and if I look at the game controller, you can see I have 92 player bullets and 16 enemy bullets. This is pretty cool. I like the dynamic aspect of this thing. It works, but I wouldn't mind if there was a bit of a delay. So again, just like I've done before, I can say, well, we can't fire, bullets all the time. So from my player behavior in my check fire function, I can say, well, if this is true, and if my times dot, or my time function, if my time dot frame count is, if it's percent, let's say, I don't know. Again, this is the bullet delay that we can add in, that we added into enemy behavior, right? We had this in our bullets, we had something called the frame delay. Let's put that back in there because we want flexibility. We don't want to hard code anything as much as possible, right? So there's our frame delay. And then down in here, we can say percent frame delay, whatever that is, right? If that is equal to 0 and this thing is true, let's just to wrap it up, just to make it look nice, we'll put it in different parens, right? Okay. So we can say this condition and this separate condition. We use an and, say first we're checking the frame count, because if the frame count's nothing, we don't care about the access. So that's why frame count should be changed first, because this is the way we're doing our delay. We're not using some kind of coroutine right now. Okay, so save, nice, and let's fire again. So run it, and now we should see, well, it's never going to fire because we're trying to divide by 0. So in our player stats, we have a frame delay. Let's make this frame delay 5. Let's change this out, and we'll also do an override apply all, so we can change that behavior script inside of our prefab. Let's run it again. And let's try this out. And now we can shoot, but it's not as crazy as before. Even if I hold it down, it's going to shoot once in a while, but it's not going to be a hose as much as before. Okay, still pretty good. Not exactly what we expect though either. And we can see that it's playing nicely with both enemy and player bullets. Yes, Sam, absolutely. It's going to cause buttons to be lost. Yeah, exactly. So there's no delay. If I continue tapping buttons, or if I hold it, I can tap my button as much as I want, or I can hold it down, and you can see that it's just going to do whatever it's going to do. All right. Right now, I don't care. I just want to make sure that this bullet thing works, which is what I've. So mission accomplished. We have a bullet pool for a player and a bullet pool for the enemy, and we're using a separate script in the game controller to create bullets. This is level 1 factory buildup. All right. Is it efficient? Hell no. Right? Not at all. Right? It's the worst code I've seen. File, save project. Let's put this up to GitHub. Okay. Now, what do I need from you guys? This is good enough for your lab. It really is. Okay. It works. As far as the player knows, everything is working fantastic. In fact, it's pretty efficient. We're using a bullet pool. We're adding to it in terms of memory management. It's not so bad. You know, we're casting a number of bullets. We're not probably going around. We're not going to create, instantiate a random number in our head, you know, as an example. Added player firing capability. But this is all, you know, first level. This is all first stage, if you will, or our first draft of the function. If your producer said to you, hey, I need the player to fire a bullet and I want it to be managed just like you do the enemy, you're done. For the most part. Is it efficient? Could you make this better? Could it be improved? Absolutely. And the things to look for you guys. So when you put this thing up on your lab, remember, lab is for your practice. So question that I have for you guys as developers. Think about what you would do differently to make my code work better. Would it be a separate bullet manager? Would it be like what Maxim said earlier, which is, would you make a bullet manager base class, you know, as an example, to save on some duplication, some shared code? What would you do differently here? And also, take a look at all these things, bullet factory, bullet stuff. One thing we could also do, guys, in our scripts folder is make a subfolder, I recommend as well, to start organizing ourselves. And we'll call this bullet scripts. So you can say that, oh, let's take all this bullet stuff, whatever is invited, and just put it inside the scripts folder. It won't affect anything, by the way. None of that's going to change the way things are working. All right. But this way, it's like, you know, you can look only at the bullet scripts, you know, as opposed to having it all here in one big file, right? It's just organization again, right? So bullet scripts is one thing that I would do for sure. But think about this. How ugly is this code? You guys should be reeling right now. when you look at this stuff. All right, so enemy behavior looks okay. We're pretty good in terms of what it does. So from an improvement perspective, I mean, it's okay. Enemy is not the problem, and neither is player, really. I mean, player and enemy look like they're okay. This needs to be improvement, like what our friend Sam said. This is not right, and neither, by the way, is the enemy behavior delay, because I'd use the same technique for the enemy behavior frame delay. And this might be a coroutine. That's another improvement that we can make. But remember, one improvement at a time, right? Hulking out for sure. It's like, wow, it should be green, right? Because it's terrible. And now let's take a look at some of these scripts. So the one thing that I like to look at is the bullet factory. So bullet factory, can you improve this? And I think this is pretty good. Like in terms of what it does, you have one creational function, right, or whatever, and it creates different bullets. But this is something that's weird, where I have multiple game objects here representing each type of bullet. This is something you can improve. For the people that are coming inbound, thank you very much. Give me 1 second. We're going to finish off this, and we'll start with you guys again. So this is okay, but could this be done differently? The answer is absolutely. You're in question for you guys. The other one, the big questions are this now. Bullet behavior, how's that? Is this okay? Well, I have this big switch case from bullet behavior. Maxim suggested an improvement here, right? Where you can do something with your direction instead of using bullet direction up and down and so on. That's something that you could do, right, for each of the bullets. And the other one is bullet manager. This is where the biggest problem is, in my opinion. The bullet factory is terrible now, right? Not the bullet factory, the bullet manager. Bullet manager is terrible now. We have multiple pools, right? An enemy bullet pool and a player bullet pool. We have a factory that we connect to. That's okay. But then we have a bunch of these switch cases. Switch case, switch case, switch case, right? And my friends, once I have these switch cases in place for the bullet manager, there could be a call for a superclass. That's definitely one way of doing it, where I'm going to have a bullet manager superclass, and I'm going to have an enemy bullet manager subclass and a player bullet manager subclass. What common elements does each one have? Some kind of queue, right? I have a queue. And I can have separate classes that do the same thing. I could, absolutely, right? And same thing with enemy bullet. This is just a counter, so you really don't need this. The add bullet and return bullet is the exact same. Add bullet and get bullet and return bullet, that's the type. And depending on the type, we could save ourselves the switch case. So we would save ourselves potentially half the code, because I'm going to make a new concrete class that's an enemy bullet manager and another concrete class that's the the thing. But overall, would you save code? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it would save code, right? So that is, you would certainly save a little bit, but again, you're going to have something like this in one, and you're going to have something like this in the other, right? So again, think about ways of improving this code, because to me, this code is still fact. And we're going to talk about ways of improving this next week. Things that we didn't do. We didn't make the enemy move around. There's no animation for the enemy, which is part of what we're doing. Remember, I could simply make different frames for the enemy's animation, the wings, if I wanted to animate them. How do I do that? Like an idle. It doesn't really have an animation built into this thing for the sprites. And what I would need is a bit of kind of additional sprites for this animation, right, for it to work, okay? But we'll talk about it next week. It's not important right now. Okay, any questions before we move on for the day? All right, and so before we start the new class, here's the stuff that you need to know for next class. Remember that we're sitting at week 6 and week 7. Next week, on the beginning of the week, I'm going to release a little test for you guys, a practical test that's going to come up around Monday. You'll have until the end of the week to get it done, okay, like I mentioned before. Also due next week is assignment 1, part 2. That's also due next week, right? So that, as we said. And then lab 4, which is exactly, if you just follow along with the code that we've done and make it work, hey, I would love to see an optimization in your code. That's due the end of this week, all right, for your 2%, okay? Any questions before we go? About part 2 assignment. How crazy should it be? What if some crazy functionality was planned but no time to implement it? Remember, Maxim, stick with the default. So people have asked that question before, and I've redirected them, and I said it may not be a good idea to try and to have a larger scope. Bring your scope down. If your scope is a little lower, revamp your game design document for part 2 and say these things are now future features. Stick to the requirements. Okay. As long as you make the requirements, yes, you can change GD, absolutely. Remember, it's a plan versus actual. What did the plan look like? Hey, we plan all these really cool things. What can we accomplish in the weeks we have? Well, only these things. And this is okay. Okay? All right, so that's it. I'm going to stop with the YouTube recording, and then we'll go back to any other questions, and we'll start the new one.